Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Joan here with another hot take. This one's about Project Veritas and their latest expose. If you haven't heard about it, you should Google Project Veritas. The video right now, as of this taping, is only on Twitter. Oh, easy, Joan. I know you're very excited. She sometimes can't catch her breath. So, what's the video? Well, as you may or may not know, Project Veritas is run by James O'Keefe. He's pretty right-wing, and he does undercover journalism, a lot against the left, admittedly, but he's come up with some pretty interesting stuff over the years. So the latest video is a Bernie Sanders organizer talking about politics and talking about what's going to happen in the upcoming election with Bernie. And it's obvious to me from the video that this guy is, you know, along the lines of an Antifa member, pretty much advocates violence in the videos, political violence, thinks that the gulags in the Soviet Union were actually not that bad, that people were, you know, paid a living wage and they got conjugal visits and they were re-educated because, you know, after World War II, they had to re-educate and I'm trying to censor myself for YouTube here, they had to re-educate the German soldiers, if you know what I mean, from World War II. You know who I'm talking about. Easy, easy, easy. The GIs used to call them ratsies. So the ratsies, he's under the impression that the gulags were to re-educate the ratsies, and the ratsies who were also re-educated in East Germany as well. So he thinks that gulags in America would be a good idea to re-educate the Trump supporters and basically the right wing, anybody who disagrees with him politically is the implication. And he believes that if Bernie doesn't get the nomination, Milwaukee will burn, was a quote. You know, he thinks fascists, they only understand violence. And of course, you know, the bar for fascism for this guy, I think, is very low, and pretty much anybody who disagrees with him is a fascist. This has been a mindset that's become more and more prevalent on the left side of politics. Now, every political movement has its extremists. The right is not, you know, immune to that. However, the right's been called out on that many, many times, and what happens? Well, usually it's somebody who said something very racist. They're called out. They're forced to apologize. A lot of times they're forced to resign their post, and they're kicked out of the party. So, you know, the Republican Party has evolved. It's not the same Republican Party it was in the 80s. There were a lot of anti-gay people in the Republican Party in the 80s. Now, while I'm sure you would count Mike Pence and a handful of others in the anti-gay column of the GOP, number one, they're not open about it. Number two, they're not doing anything about it, which is the important part. So whether or not, you know, whatever they believe, you know, they're not going to do anything at this point. And they're on their way out. And in fact, you know, if Pence doesn't get elected in 2024 or nominated, it'll mostly be because of his anti-gay stance. So there has been an evolution in the Republican Party. Now, at the Democratic Party, there's been a different kind of evolution. It's been a sharpening and a hardening of positions, because there's a split between people who have sort of drifted to the neoliberal side, which is mostly the elites in the party, and the people who've been left behind, which is a lot of socialist type people, Antifa, Marxists, who are kind of not really in the party, a lot of them. They say they are, but, one of the things this guy says in the video is the liberals get put up against the wall. It's this idea of the liberals get the bullet too. That concept is basically, when Stalin took over, the first people he killed were the true believers. And the reason he did that was because he knew that the true believers in communism would be the first to turn against him, because they would quickly realize what a scam it was. And so he had all those people killed immediately, because he didn't want to give them time to foment an opposition to him. So that's kind of the mindset behind it. Now, does this guy have any power? He's not very high up in the campaign, but the thing is, excuse me, he's not alone. And the debate back and forth on Twitter and on social media, there's a Bernie supporter, a YouTuber by the name of Shoe on Head, and she's very reasonable for the most part, although she supports Bernie, and I think believes in a more socialist America. But, she points out, well, there was a Donald Trump organizer who was arrested for, let's say, illegal naughty pictures. And, it doesn't mean Donald Trump believes in that. Well, of course. But the thing is, that crime isn't a belief system. What this guy advocated is a belief system. And it's, he's advocating criminal action for that belief system. Now, whether or not he acts on that is another story, or, he may be all bluster. But, when you get right down to it, the communist and the Marxist of the Soviet Union, who he's defending, are just as bad as the Ratsies, and in some ways a lot worse. So these people do need to be marginalized and kicked out of the Democratic Party. They will bring it down. And they've openly admitted, many of them, that they considered the Democratic Party an obstacle, not something they're looking to promote, but something to destroy, whether it's from within or, to run over. So the Democrats aren't doing themselves any favors by tolerating these people. These people should be excised from the party. And this isn't a purity test. I mean, these are values that Democrats don't have. I mean, you ask your average Democrat, he's not going to support re-education gulags for people. I'm not a Democrat anymore, but I believe most Democrats are very moderate, nice people, and they wouldn't support anything like what this, in my view, crazy person said. So, but it's sort of tacitly tolerated on the left side of politics. And you can't really do that. Not when you're in the middle of a campaign season like this. I'll give you an example from the libertarian side. We have a lot of fringe, we have fringe guys too. We have, but they're, they don't have the history that the communists and the Ratsies do. So what we have are wackaloons who, we had a guy who was running for the Libertarian candidate for president, and he got naked in the middle of his one of his speeches. We have Vermin Supreme, who was a bit of a live-action artist kind of guy, very eccentric. He ran too. I think he's running this time again. So, we have our share of wackaloons. We have, and at the ends of the extremes are the anarcho-capitalists who don't want basically any rules. They want to privatize everything, including the court system. They think if you believe in driver's license, you're some sort of, authoritarian. And what all these extremists have in common is they cannot see compromise. They see things, as the Sith do, in absolutes. And you need compromise in a political system. So, a guy like me who's libertarian, I would like to see drugs and prostitution legalized. Now, but I'm realistic about it. It's not going to happen overnight. And you probably wouldn't want to have it happen overnight. You wouldn't want to flick a switch and then have heroin and candy machines. I mean, you want to sort of ratchet it up slowly over the years so people get used to the idea, and you're not going to get everything. We're not going to get a libertarian utopia because there's other people who live in this country and they have different ideals, and some of their ideas have to be in the mix too. So, you know, and maybe I'm kind of wrong about having totally legalized drugs and no, you know, no regulations about them. Maybe there should be like a handful of rules or laws to make sure. For instance, I would totally be okay with legalizing drugs, but making sure it's out of the hands of anybody under the age of 18 or 21 or whatever the age is going to be. I'd be okay with that. I'd be okay with carding people so they could, you know, you would check their ID and so they could buy their drugs. I'd be okay with some drugs being only available through certain medical sources and treating the addiction like a more of a health crisis. You know, there's a middle ground in there somewhere that people who are against legalization could maybe live with. And that's what we need. You know, we don't need people like this Bernie organizer who holds very, in my view, very extreme views. And he should be called out for those extreme views and say, hey, listen, this is very extreme. You're advocating for gulags. Your knowledge of history is suspect, and that you advocate for any political violence is wrong. Will Bernie come out and disown this guy? I kind of doubt it because, you know, most of the audience for Project Veritas is not Bernie supporters. They're just not them. They don't consider Project Veritas a reputable source, or they consider it right-wing. And so this is mostly for right-wingers, and it'll probably leak down into the moderates. The Bernie bros don't know about it, but they'll defend it as well. This guy doesn't, you know, represent Bernie, and he doesn't. But he should be called out. He should be fired. In my view, he should be fired and marginalized, and you know, Bernie should come out against Antifa, you know, excuse me. You know, and I think he kind of has in a roundabout way, but that's part of the issue, you know, with politicians. They come out against things in a roundabout way because they kind of don't want to alienate all those extremists, because extremists do vote, you know. The problem in this country is not enough people vote. I mean, 50% of the country basically doesn't vote or more. And so you need every vote you can. If only, you know, we could motivate some of those non-voters to get up off their butts and like actually participate in democracy. You know, I think the world would be a better place, but what are you going to do? Some people just blow it off. And as a libertarian, I support their freedom to do that. But, you know, you really should check out this video. And more coming, of course, from Project Veritas. But, you know, it just shows you that there are these extremists on the left. And until the Democrats and people on the left side of politics finally draw a line, and Jordan Peterson talked about this, until they finally draw a line and say, this is unacceptable. You know, up to this point, you're fine. When you go past that line, you're out of the party. This is, you know, once you start supporting Stalin and Soviet Russia and gulags, you know, you have to go make your own party if you want to support that kind of nonsense. Because it's truly against the values of the Democrats, and I think it's against the values of the Democratic Socialists. So if you're any of those groups, you should definitely speak out against this guy.